Welcome to Ever Beyond on wolfspirit.tv, on Ever Beyond Radio, and on YouTube in a very undecipherable word. Ever Beyond. Today with Jim Nichols, we're going to be talking Billy Meier and the Aldebran connection, part 2. Welcome to Ever Beyond. Let me turn my camera on. There we go. Good afternoon, good evening, good morning, wherever you might be. This is a kind of pre-record. I'll be playing this on Monday evening as well. But it's Friday evening. It's Friday the 12th of the 2nd, 2016. Oh, lots of twos in there. Lots of lovely little love hearts. We're coming up to St. Valentine's Day, another heart thing. So let's let's go far away as we can from the heart, and we'll look at the UFOs and how they've affected us in the last 70 years, and maybe we can find a little bit more about their true nature, because things are not as we believe them to be, or things are not as we have been led to believe how they are. So in order to decipher this thing, we're going to wheel in an expert. James Nichols, good afternoon. How are you, my friend?
How are you, JP? We're doing good here in Arizona.
I'm very good. Here in Scotland, it's a little chilly, well, as you'd expect.
Really?
But
well, our winter just completely quit here about a week ago, and now it's 85 and nonstop sunshine here in Tucson.
Oh, marvelous! Because winter in Arizona is like, oh, it's you have to put a shirt on. Unlike Scotland, where summer in Scotland, oh, you got to put a coat on.
Yeah, summer lasts like about a weekend there, doesn't it?
Yeah. Sometimes it's just as much as a Tuesday.
Yeah.
So today we've gotten together. It's a kind of little mini series of interviews we're doing, really, Jim, and we're discovering what we're sharing what we've discovered. I've been doing research into Diglocker and time-space things. You've been doing research into, well, so many aspects, drilling down in various different directions of investigation in the earth, above the earth, on the surface, in history, in the past, in the future. So, would you like to start with your current situation, because you've been looking at the Billy Meier case, which is a fascinating case, because many people in the past said, "Oh, he was just holding up little models," and it turns out that he did make models because he wanted to demonstrate what the ships actually look like. And so when people say, "Look, there he is with his model," no, they weren't the ones that were on the photographs, because the photographs were not faked. They are real photographs of a real thing, really floating and vibrating and sending out ripples. And if you look at the infrared of the photo, if you look at the different frequency bands, you can see that it's not possible to fake that. It was a real thing, 50, 100 feet away. So there was the reality of Billy Meier's situation, but I believe that that was already an overlay onto something else. But I'd like you to expound what you've been researching in the meantime, Jim. So welcome, Jim Nichols, to Ever Beyond.
Thanks, Jay. Thank you. And I have to say that it was the Billy Meier case that really got me involved in serious UFO research. Back in 1980, I was having some fun doing science fiction art. And as an artist illustrator, you're always out haunting the bookstores looking for new source material, magazines and books and so forth. And I loved I love my collection of, illustrations and books by famous science fiction illustrators and so forth. So one day it was spring of 1980, I was in a Walden bookstore, and I was looking for more source material, and I came across this incredible book on the shelf there, and it was called UFO Contact from the Pleiades. And right on the cover of the book was this fantastic photograph of a flying saucer. And I thought, my God, that's the best picture of a UFO I've ever seen. And so I picked the book up and flipped through it, and there were even more pictures, more incredible pictures. And I thought, wow, it's like, even if this is fake, I said, these are the best UFO pictures I've ever seen. And it was just the kind of stuff that I was looking for, for my picture files. So I ended up buying the book, took it home, and then I read it, only to discover that it was a story about an actual UFO investigation that was going on in Switzerland. And of course, I was living in Tucson at the time, and to my great amazement, I discovered that the leader of the team that was investigating this case in Switzerland was Wendell Stevens, retired Air Force lieutenant colonel, and he lived in Tucson too.
Well, that's handy, isn't it?
I'm reading this book, and I think, God, I really would like to talk to this guy. And it seemed like I had barely formed the thought in my mind when, through a curious synchronicity of friendship acquaintances, I got introduced to Wendell. So like at least 2 weeks after I bought the book, I was at Wendell's home, and he was explaining the whole case to me. So it's like, I just kind of fell into this, and I was so impressed by the thoroughness of Wendell's research. He had just volumes and volumes of material that hadn't even been published about the case, and more photographs. And this guy's a retired lieutenant colonel. He's an Air Force pilot. He's somebody who really should know what he's talking about, right? So it was just the sheer intensity of his enthusiasm for this case, and his candid. He was very candid, very open. It's not like, oh, this is a secret I don't dare tell anybody. He was just completely open about all of it, and he seemed very happy to share as much information, as I was interested in with this case. So it's like, that's kind of how I fell into this, and more so, it's like, when I asked Wendell, I said, well, this guy claims, this Billy Meyer claims to have face-to-face contact with extraterrestrials and so forth. And, well, why aren't there any pictures of the ETs? And why aren't there any pictures of the craft, landed on the ground and so forth? And Wendell explained to me, he says, the Billy Meyer was not allowed to take those kinds of pictures because they wanted the case to just be, just to kind of tease the human consciousness into exploring the possibility that there could be living extraterrestrials out there. So in that sense, he was not allowed to give definitive proof of the case. So I thought, well, that's interesting. I thought, well, since I'm an artist, I can do paintings that show the beam ships landed on the ground. I can do paintings that show what the extraterrestrials look like and how they're dressed and so forth. So that's how I kind of was able to participate in my own way in the investigation. And so it's just, 35 years later, that's how I get involved in this crazy field of ufology to begin with.
All right, so in a way, you were sort of taking the point of view of like a police artist who sketches
Exactly.
what is needed to be to illustrate the case as
Exactly.
it's laid out.
Right.
Okay.
Right. So that because of that, and because of my association with Wendell and so forth, and I kind of got an inside view of the investigation, and from the material that Wendell shared with me, the experiences that Wendell shared with me, during his investigations that led me to believe that, yeah, this is really, they got a legitimate case here. And we were all thrilled because he thought this is, at the time in 1980, we believed that this was the definitive case that was going to, prove that, the extraterrestrial contact is real. And so we were all shocked when the whole thing went south, and everybody, these debunkers just came out of the woodwork and really, seriously attacked the case and left it really inconclusive conjecture to what it is today.
So do we, and we can assume that there were, I was just going to say MJ12 sort of ideas of there were like infiltrators and debunkers that came into the situation that muddied the waters, so to speak. Is that the case?
Yeah, the more public attention this case got, the more intense the debunking campaign became. But and for me personally, I can't say for sure that I absolutely believe that Billy was contacted by Pleiadians. I know that as far as the evidence goes, that the solid evidence is that Billy did photograph a large object, probably 20, 21 feet in diameter, at some distance from the camera. That was like the most definitive proof that they really, as investigators, without face-to-face contact themselves with the Pleiadians, that's about the best they could prove. But even that, and in and of itself, that Billy did have legitimate proof of a large disc-shaped object that is simply not accounted for in earthly technology that he was able to photograph. And that was the same issue with George Adamski a decade earlier, that Madeline Rotifer, George Adamski, with the assistance of Madeline Rotifer in 1965, in Silver Spring, Maryland, got movie footage of a large object photographed at some distance from the camera that was verified by Kodak Labs, that the film was authentic, that they did take pictures of a large object at some distance from the camera. But then that story too is debunked just the same as the Billy Meier contact. So yes, somebody is flying strange machines in our airspace that cannot be accounted for. And I think that, for me, is the bottom line. And whether they're from Venus or from the Pleiades, that remains to be seen. But the point is that yeah, for my money, it's like it's a slam dunk. Billy Meier took pictures of a real flying saucer, and George Adamski both took pictures of a real flying saucer at some point. And the problem with ufology, with UFO research, is that if you can come up with any kind of circumstantial evidence that will disprove the story of the contactee, then the whole story is thrown out. So, and I think it should be just the opposite. If you can prove that at least one photograph is authentic, then you have a genuine, unidentified flying object case. And unfortunately, ufology, as we know it today, just doesn't work that way. If you can find one flaw in the story, then the whole story goes in the dustbin of urban legends. And I think that's very unfortunate and simply a disservice to UFO research altogether.
So I've got up on the screen a
Yes.
screenshot of one of the pictures you sent me. And this is an actual photograph.
No, that's one of the photographs that was digitally examined. And they worked, and this is like Jet Propulsion Lab. The lab said, yes, this was in fact a large object photographed at some distance from the camera. It was not a model. It was not a paste up. And of course, in 1975, they didn't have digital technology, so it's not. It's not a digital.
Not Photoshop. Yeah.
It's not Photoshop. This is the real deal. This is a large object, 21 feet in diameter, photographed at some distance from the camera. Now, whether it comes from the Pleiades or it comes from Aldebran or it comes from Area 51, we don't know. Somebody knows, but we don't know as the general public. So it's like we'll just have to take it for what it's worth. And within the investigations of exopolitics, this kind of story takes on a really significant. It's significant to the whole study of exopolitics, and it shows not that UFOs are real. It shows is how the general public reacts to this. And I said, well, are we ready as humans on planet Earth to even begin to deal with the reality of extraterrestrials?
So really what we're looking at on the screen here is probably one of the best photographs from its time of a round vehicle. Let's call it a round vehicle. Let's, because it's not quite identified, but it's pretty identifiable as a round vehicle there.
Exactly.
That is using some form of gravity canceling. We can't see the video of it, but from the look of the distortion of how it is, they had a wobble to them. When they lifted up, they had a very slight wobble to them. It was like like a jelly or something.
Well, Wendell said they bob like a boat on the water.
That's
because they're bobbing on the electromagnetic field of the Earth.
Yeah, they're essentially like a ping pong ball floating on the top of a fountain.
Yes.
Except the fountain is going backwards, and long story. Anyway, so and so this is the real deal. This is a really flying object. Now, here's the thing. Now, when I was a kid, I saw the book Behind the Flying Saucer Mystery by George Adamski, and I think I read it. I devoured a lot of stuff like this.
Right.
And books about, for me, I was into books about hypnosis and particularly about regression. Is that but maybe we'll get into that a little bit later. But the who else did I see? I saw George Adamski and Alfred Watkins, The Old Straight Track, and Bruce Cathy,
right?
Which, if you bring those three things together, you introduce the concept of the Earth electromagnetic grid, which, according to Bruce Cathy, these little critters were following the grid lines. Or certainly the UFOs that he was seeing were following the grid lines and would make 90-degree turns on them as they switch from one line to another. So anyway, so I was reading about those things when I was a kid, and I was into sci-fi and watched all this stuff. And then I got on with my life. Really, grew up and become a teenager and ride motorbikes and stuff like that. But all of these things have stuck with me. I've also always had a thing about that we're not alone. And more in the last few years, it's like, please leave me alone. There's so much life around. It's like, just get off me. Beings in other dimensions who are just out of phase from me, but are still existing in this room. Stuff like that. But the UFO phenomenon has become something different now because I don't know where did it all come from. I'm trying to remember. I used to have a girlfriend 10, 15 years ago who didn't believe in the UFOs.
I've had some of those.
Yeah, and in a way, having a girlfriend like that caused me to research deeply. And so I would come up with stuff, and I was talking about colloidal silver, for instance. Hang on, and she was like, "Oh no, this is all rubbish." And so what I did is that I researched my ass off.
Right.
And I did as much research as I could, and I came up with a really good case why colloidal silver is a good idea. And actually, I still have a bottle that's got about that much left in it
Mm-hmm.
from that period, because
Mm-hmm.
I convinced her. I got to buy some silver even. So it is possible. But what I then discovered was that she had something. She had a point. There are certain aspects of these things that don't add up. Like, for instance, why is it in the 1950s they were from Mars, in the 1960s they were from Venus, in the 1980s they were from Pleiades, in the 1990s they're from Andromeda, in the 2000s they're from Zeta, they're from Draco. Do you understand what I'm saying? The cosmology is getting bigger, the narrative is getting larger, and we can wonder whether this narrative is actually disinfo to try to deflect from the idea, to detract from the idea that, in fact, these things, this thing here, sorry, I can't actually easily do this, but this thing here was built on Earth, is flown from Neuschwabenland in Antarctica, and just came to buzz the crap out of some poor Swiss farmer who couldn't tell the difference.
Right.
Your opinion, Jim?
Ooh, that's a good one. Okay, well, let's reel the clock back to 1980 once again. I'm sitting there in Wendell Stevens' office, and he's explaining these content. And Wendell at that point had been researching UFOs for 25 years, and he had the world's largest collection of UFO photographs. And Wendell was this is a retired Air Force officer, and this isn't just any Air Force officer. Wendell had been assigned to Air Technical Intelligence Command Center at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base at the end of the war. So, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base was like, they researched all sorts of aircraft. Captured German aircraft, captured Russian aircraft, captured Japanese aircraft. So their focus was intelligence, and intelligence on all the most exotic, the most state-of-the-art aerospace technology at the time. So Wendell was like an expert. He was like an expert on what state-of-the-art aircraft technology was. So he wasn't just anybody. He wasn't just any old military officer researching this. He was somebody who had a very serious high-tech background on exotic aircraft. So Wendell was convinced in 1980 that all these crazy flying saucers that had been reported, since the end of the war, were in fact extraterrestrial. He was content with that assessment. 20 years later, by the year 2000, I sat down with Wendell and had the same conversation. And Wendell says, he says, I'm not sure anymore. He says, so much information has come out over the last 20 years about the secret technologies that were being developed in Germany during World War II. He says, I'm not sure that the flying saucers that were reported all those years ago were actually all from outer space. He says a lot of them very well could have been German saucer designs that were being flown by Germans or had been captured and were being flown by our own government or by the Russians or whoever. So it's like he wasn't sure anymore. He says, I just don't know. So he was not as convinced that the flying saucers that had been reported since World War II were all from outer space. He said, there's strong indication that a fair portion of them may have been developed here on planet Earth very secretly, and we're only just now finding out about it.
So that was his conclusion
That was his conclusion toward the end of his life.
Towards the end of his life.
Yes.
And I also got a document through a mutual friend of a document by Wendell Stevens regarding, and this is slightly off, but regarding Father Crespi of Argentina.
Oh, right.
Who turns out to be, he has the same picture on his wall all through his life as Der Führer Adolf Hitler, and he could probably easily be. You could probably find the similarities. There's been some plastic surgery.
Right. I've heard Wendell's story firsthand about this. So.
Yes, tell us a bit about this, because I can't remember the name of the picture that was the giveaway.
Essentially, there was a priest down there who actually would have been comparable to the same age that Hitler would have been had he lived. And I think this is back during the 50s, early 60s, maybe. But there was no verification on it. But Wendell was very suspicious that this priest was, in fact, Adolf Hitler. And I'm a little foggy on all the details at this point, but there was somehow there was a connection to a huge cache of European artwork that had been stolen by the Nazis that were being sequestered. I don't know, and somehow this is connected with this priest in South America. But yeah, that was one of Wendell's favorite stories, that he was convinced that Adolf Hitler did survive the war. Now, whether the priest actually was Hitler or not is totally unverified. But now, Wendell also claimed that Wendell's associate in the original Billy Meyer investigation was Lee Elders, a gentleman who was from Phoenix, Arizona. And Lee and Wendell would, on occasion, would go on like Soldier of Fortune adventures or expeditions down to South America. And according to Wendell Stevens, Lee Elders was invited to a reception at the home of Martin Bormann in South America. So talk about strange connections. Anyway, Wendell also knew how well received the Germans were by numerous South American countries. So it is not inconceivable that in Argentina, the enclaves of, German expatriates found a home down there, including Adolf Hitler and Martin Bormann.
I have a very good friend, Argentinian friend, Walt Silver, and he was describing the situation of, he's about my age, and how it was to grow up in Argentina, and he said it was like growing up in Nazi Germany. It was it was not very dissimilar from those stories, and it was very harsh.
If you go online, and there's a beautiful city down there in Argentina called San Carlos Bariloche, I think that's the name of it. I could be wrong. Anyway, it's up in the mountains. If you go online, if you go to Google Images and look up this city, the images, you would swear you were looking at pictures of Austria, the Austrian Alps. And it's magnificent, beautiful scenery, beautiful snow-capped mountains, and it looks like a scene from Switzerland or from like I said, Austria. And so they would be right at home. They would feel perfectly comfortable in areas of Argentina because, like I said, it's virtually identical to the climate and the altitude and so forth of the Austrian Alps.
It's probably just how it is on Aldebran as well. So they're down in the South America. We're finding number one. So number one clue is Hitler and Bormann snuck their way down there. However he came, whether it was a submarine. Wendell's story also involves the Vatican and that he was made a priest in a very, very short order without leaving the Vatican. You know, he went through the whole seminary process and plastic surgery. So basically, in a couple of years, they had him ready to be ferreted.
Well, right. They could have, you know, they easily could have smuggled him into the Vatican and then out through Spain, and because Spain was also fascist.
Not only that, Jim, but they were
Catholic.
They were
Catholic.
It was the Catholic thing. The Catholics supported the Nazis, but Hitler had doubles.
Yes,
and I believe that in 1943 he started this process. He knew the war was turning, and he started this process of hiding himself.
Right.
That's when he threw all he could at the Glocker project and Reese and to try and. But it was basically smoke screen behind smoke screen behind smoke screen. Very, very clever.
Yeah, the more I research, the more I think that there's a huge story behind what the Germans are really doing in World War II, and it's like, and a lot of it has never ever seen the light of day.
I think you and I, Jim.
I think we would be staggered. It would be absolutely staggering.
You and I, Jim, we know.
Yes.
We know that there's more to it. We think, you know, probably you and I, we've got, well, they probably did this, you know, chemical work and, you know, nuclear and genetics and breeding. We probably have only seen 1%.
Yeah, just the tip of the iceberg. Just the tip.
Very tip.
Yes. Yeah. And I would say the same thing about the Billy Meyer case itself. I would say there's levels and levels to this that have been very, very carefully withheld. And what we see on the internet or what we see from Michael Horn is very superficial, and that there's a much, much bigger story here than that's ever been told.
The word gatekeeper comes to my mind. But
it's a good word.
Yeah, let's just leave it at that. We know.
Right, and let's keep it at, you know, the silly superficial level and say, oh yeah, he was just hanging models with wires, and let it go at that. But I think there's a much, much bigger story here.
Absolutely, absolutely. So let's delve down. Let's go down this rabbit hole a little bit.
Well, let's drill down a little bit more about the models.
Yep.
Did you know that one of the special effects men for Stanley Kubrick's 2001: A Space Odyssey built a model for Billy Meyer to use?
Yes. Yeah, well, because I read your article. That's how I know that.
No, that was well.
By the way, Jim.
Yes.
Jim. How do people, first of all, if they want to refer to your article, how do they get there?
Go to jimnicholsufo.net, and it's listed as blog number 19. It's the 40th anniversary of the UFO contact from the Pleiades.
Okay.
But also, I just went back and reread Gary Kinder's book, Light Years, which came out right after Wendell Stevens' investigation, which was an independent study of Wendell's investigation. So you have Wendell's original investigation, which he published, and then Gary Kinder came along and did his own independent research or investigation of the Billy Meyer investigation, which was, and he came along and verified virtually everything Wendell was talking about in the original investigation. But one thing he shared was that a British special effects genius, his name was Wally Gentleman, worked on the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey with Stanley Kubrick. He provided Billy Meyer with a model of one of the Pleiadian beam ships, which they would take photographs, comparison photographs between the model, and they would compare those digitally with the photographs that Billy had originally taken. And through the digital examination, they could tell very easily which image was a large object photographed at some distance from the camera, and which object was a small model suspended by wire. So that was really easy to prove right from the get-go. So, and Wally Gentleman also stated, he says, if somebody wanted me to cheat something like what Billy Meyer, the photographs that Billy Meyer had done, he says it would cost probably $30,000 to do it. But he says that's working in a studio.
Yeah, that's if you already got the gear.
The equipment in the bloody studio would cost $50,000 on top of that.
Yeah.
So here's Billy Meyer out there with his little moped, riding around the back roads of Switzerland, and with no money, no special effects equipment, and he's able to produce photographs that a top-notch special effects company could not duplicate. And also the special effects expert the two that worked on Independence Day said the same thing. This is, oh yeah, they could easily do that today with CG, but they said to be able to duplicate the films that Billy shot on Super 8, he says, would be virtually impossible. So it's like whatever, they don't know what Billy photographed, but they said that comparatively that would be virtually impossible that to do what Billy did on just a simple Super 8 movie film.
Okay. So when we look at this craft and we look at Maria, sorry, Semyase, that blew my case. that blew my punchline.
Yeah, left the cat out of the bag on that one.
Yeah. But when we look at, hang on, let me just see. Now, she said, you can't photograph me.
Right.
There she is.
Yes.
There's Semyase as depicted in your painting.
Yes.
Of Billy.
Right.
And you're painting the details of the ship, the antenna, the little portholes, the number of portholes, the distribution of the telescopic legs.
Mm-hmm.
This looks Earth technology to me, but it is very small. It's much smaller than a Glocker. Yeah, the Glocker would stand. Well, say she's about 6'5" or something. This thing is only about 10 feet tall, and I believe the Glocker. So it would be a smaller model, but I do believe they made smaller models. But
well, you have to understand there's like 30 years difference, and they've had 30 years to advance their technology, which I'm sure they could improve. And
not only that, they had time travel.
Yeah, right.
So it's very possible that this could be a future-built ship with technology from the future brought back into the 70s and 80s.
Well, this gets real interesting. Now, have you ever read any of the messages, Billy's contact notes?
Well, I was, interestingly enough, for a very random reason, I was exposed to Billy Meyer's story of the Earth through the contact papers. Right. And because that's my current mission is to find out what's the truth about our solar system, what happened to Maldek, what's the asteroid belt, Jupiter, Saturn, was it a sun? The whole thing. It's because I'm getting loads of different stories at the moment about what this whole thing is about. So this is part of it. This is part of the whole situation. And I find myself last night reading Billy Meyer's contact papers, and I didn't have in my mind, oh right, tomorrow I'm talking to Jim and he's talking about, but there we are. I did actually read about 6 pages of material from Billy Meyer's contact, but mostly about solar and galactic history.
Well, to get a real sense of the Pleiadians and how they think and how they act and so forth, and how the interaction with Billy worked, you need to go and read the entire text. One of the things Semyase shared with Billy is that while the Pleiadians didn't really build those spaceships, they said the Pleiadians weren't that technologically oriented. It was Billy had another female contact whose name was Asket, who came from a completely different universe called the Dal universe. And according to Semjase, she said they got their technology, that the Dal universe extraterrestrials that they were in contact with were the ones who provided them these spaceships, which I thought was very interesting.
That's very interesting. So are they a parallel universe to us, therefore? Or, I mean, is it, when
that's
you look,
it gets kind of crazy because
I'm thinking fringe here.
We're interfacing with all kind of alternate dimensions and universes simultaneously here. So it's like they're able to slip from one time-space dimension to another, and to them it's like it's no big deal. It's like going out in the kitchen to get a drink. It's just not a big deal, and they do it all the time. So but they said that the Dal universe is a completely separate universe from even the Pleiadians. So, but there's this interface and there's this exchange that goes on between them. So anyway, you take that for what it's worth. That's in the contact notes.
So, there's a whole lore all about and oh yeah, that's right. I was reading about Era. Okay, so can I see it from here? Hang on. Up behind me. I'll just turn on my camera and illustrate what I'm talking about here.
Well, if I may, just
please.
For those people who want to debunk the Meyer case, and actually, even if you look at the Meyer contact notes, even if this is complete fiction, you have to give Meyer credit for being an extraordinary science fiction writer.
Storyteller, amazing, yes.
A brilliant storyteller. And because when you read the notes, it's like Semjase is a real person. I mean, she comes across as a very, very skillfully developed character, even for fiction, even as a fictional character. That she's very well defined, and you give a very clear sense of this person's personality and her insights. And the other thing is that the sheer volume of super advanced technology and cosmology and metaphysics and all this incredible information, you have to ask yourself, was a Swiss farmer with one arm and as limited as he didn't even get past 6th grade, how was he able to access it? Where did he get access to all this sophisticated scientific and historical, astronomical, astrological, metaphysical knowledge all on his own?
Mm.
So just the sheer volume and the sophistication of the material that's in his contact notes tells you that he's in touch with somebody who's providing this information for him, and it's very doubtful that he could have just invented it on his own.
That's another point. However, let's just, because I'm interested in the story, because as I said, this is all in the investigation of my own investigation of really who I am and where I come from and what is I, all that stuff. I just want to point out. So behind me, I'm just trying to laser the thing. There we go. There's my laser. There in the Pleiades. At this point here, that torch is sending a bit of glare. Hang on, there we go. There's the Pleiades. This where's it being gone down here? This one here, this position is Alcyone,
right?
Alcyon, and hang on, up there, there we are. There, right, that point there is Taygeta,
right.
And Taygeta is the star system that according, and this is where I was getting from, because Taygeta is sort of in my history somewhere as well. That's a name that came to me, and then I eventually found out that it's one of the stars in the Pleiades. So so the idea that they came from a star called Taygeta is kind of one data point. And then a few years ago, I connected with our mutual friend, Mr. Tolek, and he told a story about the Decote, which is another star with another planet that orbits Taygeta. And then I start reading about the Billy Meyer case, and the Billy Meyer case says, oh, we come from a planet called Era around Taygeta. So there is something about Taygeta that is kind of seminal. There is something that kind of started there and has dispersed from there. And I don't believe that it's all 100%, positive. Let's put it that way. What's your feeling about, what's the character of these Pleiadians, and particularly the Plejars, who are the descendants of Pleyar, and all this stuff. I read all about that.
That's why I wanted to have Simon Parks on the show, because he seems to have a really good handle on what the Pleiadians are kind of all about. And I've listened to Simon Parks' comments about the Pleiadians, and he's very knowledgeable about them. And what he paints a picture that is essentially the same as what Billy Meyer shared, back in 1975. So it's like we thanks to the Billy Meyer case, we have a fairly good idea of what these so-called Pleiadians are all about. They're humanoid. They look like us. You could pass them on the street and not know that they were extraterrestrials, and that they have always had. If you want to get into the humanoid reptilian conflict, they're not particularly fond. They're not altogether fond of the reptilians. I think,
yes.
To put that, to phrase that somewhat like Simon Parks would phrase it. But for me, then that's where the problem sets up for me. Is that, well, are we really talking about extraterrestrials, or are we talking about a group of beings from right here on planet Earth who have assumed a totally different identity, because they have these technologies where they can move in and out of time, space, and dimensions, and so forth. So even if they're ex-Nazis from the Antarctic, they might just as well be from the Pleiades, because they live in a technology, a techno civilization that might as well be extraterrestrial, because it's so radically different from what we live in our everyday life here. So I don't know. I'm kind of cautious about hanging my hat on this whole, or are they really Pleiadians out there or not? And the other problem is what Michael Horn threw a monkey wrench into all of this, and this is what I would like to talk to Simon about also. He says, well, that Meyer claims that by 1995 they admitted that, well, we really are not from the Pleiades. We are Plejarans or Pleyarans, and we come from a completely different star system than the Pleiades. And that if you took a starship and flew to the Pleiades star cluster today, you wouldn't find anybody there, because, well, we come from a different time-space reality. And it's like, well. But then, but we have the same names for our stars in the Plejarian system as the stars that are in the Pleiadian system. So it becomes totally confusing, which and who's. And I have never heard Simon Parks make reference to Plejarans. Have you?
No,
as
he
opposed to
says
Pleiadians.
Pleiadians. He says
He has
Pleiadians.
always referred to them as Pleiadians.
Hmm.
And so I'm thinking, well, if anybody should have a handle on this, it should be Simon Parkes. So this is one thing where we really need to get Simon,
Okay,
sit
well,
him down and
we'll
get him
post
to define this for us.
Definitely, because you know, like I said, in the 50s they were from Mars, and in the 60s they were from Venus, and you know they got further and further away as our consciousness expanded beyond our like village.
Exactly. Right.
And so, you know, we find there's these anomalies. Is that this woman can speak, you know, several languages, and speaks perfect Austrian German.
That should be a tip off right there. Right?
Exactly. Now, I believe that she didn't really want to be identified truly.
No,
and that's another clue.
We could talk about that.
Let's talk about Semyase herself.
Let's talk about her. Yeah. If you read the messages, when Billy Meyer asked her what her name was, she says, "Well, I could give you my name, but it's virtually unpronounceable." So she says, "You can just for easier reference, just call me Semyase." But the point was that was really not her name. That her name was something else altogether, and it's not that her real name is not printed out in the contact notes, as far as I can recall. So it's like we call her Semyase. She referred to herself, you know, with Billy as, "You can call me Semyase," but she says that's not my real name. So it's like, you know, you're dealing with it's like an intelligence operation, Jay. It's like intel. It's like they're operatives from another reality, another dimension, another planet, and you know they're on some kind of an intel operation here to somehow subtly alter the human perception of extraterrestrials.
Well, here's an interesting thing. If I was, let's say, a Nazi down in a subterranean base, or in Neuschwabenland in my little throne, you know, next to the Stargate, talking to the Hollow Earth. If I was going to do this, if I was going to say make a fake invasion, I would lay the groundwork. And this would be very much like I would be, you know, like I would do, if you see what I mean. And there you go. You know, there are Pleiades, there are real stars there, and they call them the same names as we do. And there's Era, and there's Terra, and then there's Dakota, and Dakota. You know, and these very subtle changes. And in fact, you know, people who live in New York think they live in New York, right? But if you look at it, it's New York. It's the people came from York and they went to this other place and they say, well, we're Yorkshire, so this is York, and so this is New York, and that's how things get changed. And presumably they're a lot more economical, and so instead of having Error, they have Terror. You know, if that's the sequence of occupation. So stories and names and all that stuff. I still think the Nazis could fabricate a whole bunch of crap like that because they did do a lot of galactic history. They spoke to the Tibetans, they spoke to the Chinese, they went all over the world because they were looking for the Aldebrans, the master race, you know. And so they got a lot of galactic history, and they could probably fabricate all of this stuff and make it seem really kind of juicy. And yet now we're coming up and we're saying, hang on a second. Well, other people say that the Pleiades is, you know, uninhabitable.
Right.
I don't think so, actually. I think that they're the further out of the spiral arm from us, and therefore they're older.
Well, that's the Simon Parkes makes that same distinction. He says, well, yeah, there are civilizations in the Pleiades, but they did not originate there. And that's exactly what was in the Meyer contact notes, that originally they came from the constellation Lyra, and they resettled in the Pleiades, but they did not originate in the Pleiades.
That's
and
right.
Simon says Simon says the same thing. So it's like that in it of itself is spot on with exactly what Billy Meyer has in his contact notes.
Mm-hmm. So that still doesn't mean that she's not from Neuschwabenland.
No, absolutely.
It still doesn't.
Okay, all right.
It still doesn't rule that out.
All right, Jay. Flip it around like this. Okay, you're one of the ladies of the Vril. You're flying around in a Honeyboo that's souped up, a souped up Honeyboo.
Yeah.
Right,
So
and you land in Switzerland. Right, you land in Switzerland, and you go up to this farmer, and what are you gonna say? Hey, I'm one of the ladies of the Vril Society from Nazi Germany. I said, people are going to freak out when you say stuff like that. So it's like, no, you come down with your mysterious flying machine, and you land, and you get out. Oh, hi, I'm from the Pleiades, and it's like, oh, okay, that's cool. I can live with that.
Yeah,
right?
It's too close to and too scary to be real.
Well, it's
because
like
what could be worse?
You can't get off the ship and, hey, I'm a Nazi from 1945. It's like, no, that just doesn't work here. So how can you interact with humans here again? 45 says 20 years after the end of World War II, and you can show up with your fancy little flying machine and say you're from the Pleiades, and then that would be more acceptable. That would be easier. That would mask the shock. And not to say that their intention was evil or nasty. It's like, you have to ask yourself, well, if the Germans actually did develop these technologies, if they were able to go to other dimensions in space and time, do they still have the same aggressive, violent nature? Have their technologies changed their character?
Well, here's the thing. I don't think so, to be honest. Some people say, right, because we're kind of moving ahead a bit, but let's kind of move aside. But a lot of this links in with this TV series called Fringe, which depicts a parallel dimensional conversation between two members of the same two examples of the same person.
Mm-hmm.
One appears to be good, one appears to be evil. There seems to be a more of a kind of higher tech, but more Nazified parallel dimension that they're connecting with.
Mm-hmm.
And eventually it becomes a battle as to which one, in the end, there can only be one timeline, and which one does humanity choose? And the story of the love story, that makes things complicated because that's what's causing the problem.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion, anyway. But so here we are, parallel dimensions, and Nazis. Because here's the first thing. What could be worse than, say, we were scared of if the Nazis got hold of atomic weapons, right? So there was, we had the Manhattan Project, and get as fast, do this as fast as we can. The Nazis did so much research on all levels of being a human.
Mm-hmm.
Sean David Morton told me that there are 750,000 new scientific terms that we had to integrate during the process of Project Paperclip. We know that now all the Nazi soldiers, the Nazi scientists are now no longer in Germany. They and their children and their children's children are in Project Paperclip CIA families, American dad,
Right.
There's
Plus American aerospace also. American aerospace industries, right?
all aerospace industry,
Right.
all military industrial complex.
Mhm.
They're the soft Nazis, the military industrial complex. The real hard Nazis are underground. They're in bases under South Africa, under the ocean, in that odd area that you can see on Google Maps. There's a funny sort of squarey area off the coast of Africa. They're under there. They're in the mountains in the Andes, and obviously well entrenched in Argentina. Neuschwabenland in Antarctica, probably on the moon, probably on Mars, probably on various other places.
Well,
What could be worse, we think, than Nazis with atomic weapons, Nazis with space weapons, Nazis with Nazis with time travel? This is my, I'm going to be writing a book called "In Search of the Time Traveling Nazis," because that's the worst thing you could imagine. Because when they can, when you mess about with time, you can destroy entire races. I know, bit heavy. Right?
Very, very. The distinction I want to make here is with Maria Orsic and the Vril Society, and with Nazi Germany. The Vril Society, their original intent was to make contact with an off-world intelligence for the express purpose of accessing advanced free energy and interstellar space travel kind of technologies. And they were not interested so much in territorial conquest here on planet Earth. They wanted to introduce a different kind of technology than what dominated the banks and the military, or the heavy industries. They were promoting war for profit. Okay, the Vril Society was not about that, and the ladies of the Vril were not about that. But their interest in their contact with extraterrestrials, allegedly the Aldebran system and so forth, apparently they did in fact make extraterrestrial contact, and they were getting access to technologies that would benefit society as a whole, in general. And one of the stories was that the crash at Spitsbergen was actually not an extraterrestrial ship. It was one of the Vril Society's ships that had been the technology for it had been provided by the beings in Aldebran. But when they learned that the Thule Society and the Third Reich, had military interest in turning this technology into weaponry, they caused that saucer to crash. And that they were horrified by the idea that this technology was going to be used for war purposes. So that's one of the stories that Wendell shared, that the Vril Society and the ladies of the Vril were not about World War II. They were not about war. They were not about territorial expansion. They were into developing technologies that would, like Tomorrowland. If you go and watch the movie Tomorrowland, that was the essence of what the Vril Society was about, to develop technologies that would benefit everybody, that would make interaction between cultures on this planet easier and more economical, so you wouldn't be constantly fighting wars and so forth. So in that sense, I'm not sure that maybe all the people that evacuated Germany at the end of the war were necessarily bloodthirsty Nazis.
Well, there is the lore, the legend that there's a breakaway civilization, and that there was well, there's several breakaway civilizations to start with, but there was one where they went to space and they met, you know, other spacefaring people who said, "No, no, 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 no. Oh, no, you didn't. You can't do that. You can't be like that. You're going to have to change." And they did. And that there is a kind of reformed Nazi who's, you know, probably more like this vril idealism.
Exactly.
Kind of thing.
And if you listen, and if you listen to, you know, the spiritual messages and so forth that Samyasi has to share, and the metaphysical insights that she shares, I think that's probably more in line with what the ladies of the Vril were after at that time. It's like, you know, they weren't hardcore, you know, into hardcore aggression. It's like, to be able to do what they did, you know, on a psychic level, I don't think they could be that kind of evil, nasty people. And maybe I'm just being, you know, more ideological here. But anyway, I think there's a distinct difference, and you can't whitewash everybody with the same Nazi brush.
Okay, so we won't blackwash them, but there is some, you know, like we're saying, some kind of psychological operation that is going on, and we're also, you know, we have to be wise as serpents. We can't just go around saying, "Oh, the Pleiadians and they're here to save us," and you know. From what I'm learning, you know,
and they always said that, you know, that's it's not their responsibility to impose that upon us. It's like this is the responsibility of every developing, you know, culture throughout space. It's like, you have the responsibility to learn this for yourselves, and if you don't, you will deal with the consequences.
Yeah, and so where we're finding ourselves, well, where I'm finding myself today, is there's so much. There's a fractal that is going on that we are now beginning to see one point on the scale of it. And what we're talking about is the false flag. Humans are learning about the false flag, how you can have an action happen that appears to be one thing, and then you throw propaganda at it. And they've been learning this for like, you know, 80, 90 years. You can throw propaganda at it, spin it around, and make it look like the opposite of what it was. I think, was it William Casey who said, you know, the CIA will have done its job when all Americans believe a complete lie, or something like that.
Yeah, former CIA director Bill Casey. That's exactly when everything that the American people believes is a lie, we'll know we have done our job.
That's right. So what is the job? The job is to convince people that there is an extraterrestrial movement that is for our benefit that seems to be coming from the Pleiades. Now, that's not to say that there isn't a group of beneficent ETs in the Pleiades, and also that there is also another group of not so beneficent beings in the Pleiades as well. It's complicated. It's really complicated. And it's like saying there's terrorists in Syria, there's terrorists in here and there. So let's go. It's exactly the same situation, Jim, in my opinion. It's exactly the same as what's going on. And so there's another reason why people want Earth, in the same way there's another reason why Bush wants Yemen.
Okay, well, let's go back. Let's step back just a little bit. One of the things one of the points I wanted to make in my article was that if the Billy Meyer case is a fraud, if it's a fake, then all the technology that he describes in his messages, if you can disprove the science that he describes in his contact notes, then the whole thing's a fraud. Then none of it's real. So I went back and I said, well, you know, what are the comparable are there comparable technologies that are being worked out here on planet Earth right now that the Pleiadians talked about, you know, 20 years ago? So when it came up with anti-gravity, free energy, Nikola Tesla published an article in the New York Times as early as 1908 where he absolutely described the fundamentals of anti-gravity and free energy. 1908, okay? And then along in 1995, aerospace engineer Ben Rich revealed that the defense contractors have since mastered Tesla's technologies and have achieved interstellar flight capability. But once again, he says, but it would take an act of God for us to let this technology out to benefit the general public. So it's like, well, where are the enemies here? You don't need extraterrestrial enemies. We have enemies right here within our own military-industrial complex, right? And then one of the things that is repeated on this is this phenomenon that happens constantly through Meyer's contact notes is that Billy is teleported from here, and he's teleported out of his office. He's teleported off his farm, off into the Pleiadian beam ship, and he's taken here and there across the galaxy and so forth. And I said, well, there's no such thing. The teleportation that's nonsense. That's science fiction. Well, in 2001, the National Science Foundation announced plans that were loudly promoted by Newt Gingrich called the Age of Transitions. This is the plans that they have for the near future, which is a vast scientific research program to develop robotics, cybernetics, artificial intelligence, life extension, brain enhancement, virtual reality, genetic engineering, and teleportation. So once again, these are very terrestrial technologies that were described in Billy Meyer's contact notes as early as 1975. And this is where we are today. And Wendell and his team also interviewed a gentleman who worked for McDonnell Douglas Aerospace, and his name was David Froning, and he confided to both Wendell Stevens and Lee Elders, and even to me. I talked to him personally about this, and he discussed practical means for what he called transluminal flight systems, which means faster than light travel. And this was already being developed. He was talking about this publicly as early as 1980. And he said that, well, you know, based on the technologies that they were developing, that we could fly probably from planet Earth to a system like the Pleiades in roughly 8 hours.
Okay.
And if you read the contact notes, Semyasi says, well, it takes us about 8 hours to fly from the Pleiades to planet Earth.
Okay, so I'm still gonna hit the this same tangent, right? Because I right, from what I've spoken to people. I've spoken to a gentleman called William Stillings. Are you aware of him?
No.
He was a member of Project Pegasus in the 1960s. He's my age. Mm-hmm. But when he was 8, his CIA father would take him to work and draw him through, just like in Fringe, mm-hmm. take him through a teleportation system.
Right.
They ended up in this place in Mars. Mm-hmm. And he went there several times, and as an occupation, apparently they just want people to occupy Mars, people to be there, so that they have a footing there.
Right.
And
like Andy Basiago.
Yes, he and Andy were. He's a great fan of Andy's. He says that Andy's like the most risk-taking, swashbuckling, buccaneering time travel chrononaut that we have.
Okay.
That he's like the kid at the front. So he's a scientist, Stillings, and knows all about the rotation and oscillation of elements and bismuth, and he's always talking about it. So he knows all about this science. Now, what I'm putting forward, Jim, is that by 1968, they had already mastered all of those things and had all of that knowledge. Remember, it's still the Nazis. So they have their knowledge base,
Right.
and they have been researching everything since the 1920s, maybe even before that. And that they had that technology at the time to produce a fake semjase with one of their most intelligent, sensitive, psychic people that they had, who's already traveled the stars, or was, and could probably, act as a remote avatar if needed be, with somebody who's got a microphone and knows what to tell him, can read out of books and stuff, answering his questions. Do you understand? It could be a real Truman Show, fake.
Right.
I mean, that sounds really, really paranoid, doesn't it? But,
I know. I know.
My middle name.
That's the problem. It's like we're dealing with technologies here that are so advanced that it's extremely difficult to really pin it down what is true and what is not true.
Or you could say that technology is not advanced, it is normal, and we are retarded in the true sense of the word.
Absolutely. And that's the other flip side of the coin and this is something that Stephen Greer has addressed here this late last year, that the national security state and the military industrial complex and the bankers and everything have literally they have all of human society in like a prison camp and have been holding us here for the last 100 years, where the national security state has its own separate science, its own separate technology, its own separate Starfleet system that we have no access to whatsoever.
Exactly.
And it's like, and who knows? Like, who really knows how advanced are their technologies?
Well, some people say that they're 100 years ahead. Some people say they're thousands of years ahead.
Right.
So,
and they said that, and the technology keeps expanding exponentially. It's like what you knew last year doesn't expand. It will expand. Exponentially. It's like what you learned last year will expand 100-fold, and then 500-fold, and then 1,000-fold, very quickly, because this technology builds on itself very rapidly. And so it's like it's very likely we have a breakaway civilization that, well, they might just as well be extraterrestrials, because they're so advanced that we can very barely comprehend what they're able to do.
Exactly. And it's normal. This is their normal life.
Yeah, it's normal. Exactly.
When I was a kid, in the 60s, I was watching shows like Star Trek and Thunderbirds, which was even puppets.
Right.
But they showed, this guy Jerry Anderson was the Gene Roddenberry of your
right.
And he did it in puppets instead of live action because we're cheap. We're just cheap in Britain, and so we couldn't afford actors and sets.
Don't have to pay those bloody actors.
Bloody actors, yeah, and they're all gay anyway. So anyway, long story. But they created the this series, and even in Galaxy Quest, they're sort of self-mocking, saying, we found these documentaries, and we built from the plans from your documentary evidence, and like the documentary evidence was like broadcasts of Star Trek that they picked up in their galaxy. So but it just seems to be now, from my perspective in 2015, learning what I have learned, speaking to real people who've experienced this real thing. I tell you, I have grilled Stillings over the last 5 years. Say, all right, what was it like in the jump room? And he would describe it to the T, exactly perfectly, the same way, the same feeling. He's not faking it.
Right.
There's no.
Have you seen the movie Tomorrowland?
Yes. But I want to see it again because I got a really,
I'd like for you to see that again, especially because of the when the characters in that go through the jump room, the distortion effects that they experience, and the how it affects them physically, they're very specific in the film about how people react to that once they've gone through the jump gate. And I'd like for you to compare that, what they show in the film, with what your experiencers claim actually happened when they went through the jump gate, and see if there's a correlation.
The first thing that I would come up with is water.
Mm-hmm.
One of the things that he said was that you lose water
Mm-hmm.
desperately when you time travel and when you portal travel.
What about blood sugar? Does your blood sugar drop?
I'm not so sure about the blood sugar, but the first thing he says and people used to teleport into his living room.
Right.
He was like living in the place where the portal was, and he knew the first thing that you have to give them is water. The sink's over there, and they run to the sink because they're incredibly thirsty. And if you don't,
there's a scene. All right, there's a scene in Tomorrowland where they go through the jump gate experience, and the young girl that's in, she's the main character in this. I think Casey is her name. She's rolling around on the floor after she gets out of the jump gate, and she says, "I'm dying, I'm dying." And George Clooney tells her, he says, "You just need a Coke." He says, "Your blood sugar's low, and you're obviously dehydrated." So she runs to this refrigerator and she just downs a whole bottle of Coke like instantly. And I wonder if that's really what that's based on actual.
Yes, because plasma
right.
confinement. Plasma is like high frequency, high energy matter.
Right.
No longer has a form because it's so hot it can't stay together, and that has a effect on the plasma of our blood. Our blood is plasma, right?
Blood plasma.
I know it's the same word. It's the same thing at a different frequency level.
Yes.
See what I mean? So that there is a relationship, I believe. But so. Oh, the whole relationship between water, the dissolution of water, pyramids, using pyramids as time and space travel devices, all of that stuff. It's all to do with our consciousness being connected with water.
Well, what is water? What is water? Water is like
exactly.
It's not quite. It's like interdimensional. It's not quite etheric, and it's not quite solid. It's water in itself is kind of an in between element. So yeah, it's like I understand what you're saying.
So
you there?
Yeah.
Go ahead.
That was one of the key things is about time and space travel. So if you ever want to check people, if you ever want to check if somebody really has time traveled, ask them about water, because it's a really major factor. The other thing he said about the portal experience when using the jump room, he said it's very calibrating. From what I understand about that, it's like, imagine if you and all of your diseases and miasms and all of that were to be, if you were to be able to be, if they could beam you out of your body without the diseases and leave the diseases behind. That's what he says it's like, because that's what happens, because that's what all the water that disappears is.
Right. Well, I would think in that sense that it would probably reconfigure your DNA.
Probably. And probably make you less unintelligent.
Well, it would, I could see it as, so much of the pollution and the impurities in our water and our food are actually jamming the codes of our DNA. So if you could walk, if you could walk through a dimensional filter, and in fact, I think they even show this in the movie Elysium, where they scan you and it reconfigures it properly reconfigures your DNA, so it's not being injured by all the poisons and toxins in our environment. Interesting,
isn't it? So what I'm saying, Jim, is that this creature, Semyase, could well have been a contemporary, but she could have spent like 40 years in, yes, an interplanetary situation where she travels to Aldebran, she travels to Pleiades. She may have gotten about a bit, and you learn things. I mean, in 2 years, I've learned a vast amount. Imagine what I could learn in 20 years if I was hanging out with really, really super bright people who weren't dumbed down by all the toxins and the chemicals and the EMFs on this planet.
Exactly. Right.
So, I don't know if we're any closer to proving this point, but I think that there you sent me this image here. There's Semyase, there's Maria Orsic. Do we have any full length pictures of her standing next to anybody that we know the height of? From Germany.
And not that I'm aware of.
Because where is it? Which I am. I'll get the right. There we go. If I find there was a picture.
No, Semyase was very petite, and Billy Meyer wasn't even as tall as Wendell, and Wendell just came up to my shoulder. And Billy said that Semyase was even was shorter than he was. So she's not, she's not an imposing figure.
Yeah. So is that her talking to him? Is that Billy Meyer?
No, that's George Adamski. That's the Venusian. That's the little Honeybu scout ship in the background.
Yeah. So perhaps this lady was not.
No, this is not. This is a guy. This is a male, but he had long blonde hair.
Really?
Yes. Right.
A dude.
It's not a woman.
A space dude.
It's dude. Right.
Okay. So and again, perhaps part of a psyop. Find a really people that you can't really because apparently this is what the real ETs also do, is that they don't land on the White House lawn because they get shot down. They go and visit people in the remote areas and have chats with them.
There you go. That's called a soft touch psyops. And but once again, so this is the 1950s, and there's George Adamski standing, and it's like, so a man walking up to you, and actually it was a brown jumpsuit. I show it there as blue, but it was actually a brown jumpsuit with long blonde hair. And it's like, well, long hair was not fashionable for men in the early 1950s. So it's like he would have looked rather exotic. So if you start with that, if you look slightly off, you look slightly exotic, and you step out of a flying saucer, and people are going to say, oh, the first reaction is, oh, you must be from outer space. And that was very acceptable in the 1950s.
Exactly.
So, well,
people have been programmed for it.
Right. And you say, oh, I'm from Venus. Oh, wow. So you're from outer space. Now, in 1980, 1975, people were more sophisticated. They said, well, no, there's no life on Venus. Venus is just a dead rock, right? So we play the same game again in 1975 in Switzerland. The lovely lady steps out of the ship and says, "Oh, I'm from the Pleiades." And I go, "Oh, okay. Well, it's just like, we don't know about the Pleiades. Pleiades is an unknown item compared to Venus. So if you're landing in 1975, you say you're from Venus, people can say, I don't know, I don't think I believe that. But if you say you're from the Pleiades, it's like, oh, well, that's different. We don't know the Pleiades. So it's like you can put a different spin on it. But once again, here she is. She's blue-eyed, blonde, long hair, speaking perfect Austrian German. It's like, okay, well, do they speak Austrian German in the Pleiades? She says, oh no, I had to go to school for 10 years just to learn Earth culture before I would even approach you. So, it's plausible deniability.
Exactly.
Where's the truth here? But there is another way to measure the truth, I think, in a certain way, and this is something that nobody ever talks about. And this is a lot of the stuff that Wendell shared with me, is how they were being followed by the CIA every time they went to Switzerland. The CIA would debrief them in London before and after their visits to Billy. One of the things that Jim Gelatoso and Wendell both shared with me is that the CIA had purchased a farm up on the hill above Billy's property, so they were able to have constant 24/7 surveillance on the Meyer farm all during the period of when he was having the contacts. And Billy himself, because he realized he was being followed everywhere he went, the Pleiadians canceled their daylight contacts with him and would only have contacts with Billy in the middle of the night. And in those contacts, rather than for him to ride off in his moped, they would just beam him directly off the farm. So it's like the Meyer case was being watched and monitored very, very closely by intelligence agencies, and not just the CIA. It was Swiss intelligence. It was probably Russian intelligence also. So it's like for a guy just playing with models, hanging them from strings out in the countryside, I don't think that would have gotten him the attention of intelligence agencies the way the Meyer case did.
Fascinating. So we've actually got a question. We got a question coming in from the listeners, and this is from Love Privacy. Why did this sort of contact from Sumiyase stop? Why are there no recent accounts?
Well, that's a good question, isn't it?
Very good.
1980. Well, let's look at the timeline. In 1980, the Billy Meyer case gained absolute global notoriety. People all over the world knew about the Billy Meyer case. And Billy Meyer, the messages from the Pleiadians were being disseminated all over the world by 1980. What's interesting is that 3 years later, President Ronald Reagan announced the imposition of the Strategic Defense Initiative. And we wanted to create an umbrella over the United States to protect us from Soviet nuclear missile attack. Well, was that the stated purpose, and was the real purpose actually to create a shield or a space-based defense system that would keep ET out of here? And that the real message of the Strategic Defense Initiative was not to protect the American population, but it was to protect the authority of the ruling interests of planet Earth. And the message was for ET to stay home. We don't want Pleiadians or Andromedans. We don't want these people down here giving the Earth humans different ideas about how this planet should be run. So that's what Reagan initiated in 1983, and I think and then in 1992 we saw the SDS-48 space shuttle mission, where we saw a particle beam weapon being used to chase away a flying saucer or an unidentified object. So were these technologies actually being deployed by the early 90s to keep ET away? And then in 1995, according to Michael Horn, he said that the Pleiadians abandoned their Earth bases here on planet Earth by 1995. So was SDI so successful by the early 90s that the ET had backed off, because we actually had technologies that would possibly be dangerous for them. So I think that's a very interesting timeline to take into consideration. It was, well, why don't we have more Billy Meyer cases worldwide? You would think that that there would be more of that happening, and in fact, there's hardly any. So I'm thinking that, well, the powers that be wanted to protect their interests here politically, and the Pleiadians and friendly contact, friendly contact with extraterrestrials just does not play into the alien menace threat that drives our space-based weapons program.
Well, that's a good point. That's, I think, probably the best point.
That's high octane speculation on my part. But if you just kind of look at the progression of how this has worked, it's like, oh, maybe there's something to it.
Well, yeah, I think there is. What you were saying is kind of, from what how I'd express it, it was kind of almost skirting around the issue. But we need to lay it out. We need to lay out what's really going on. And that it's just like here out there. That down here is a model of what's out there, as above, so below. It's a fractal, which means that what we call the theater of war in the Middle East, that's planet Earth. For the rest of the galaxy, it's like we're the Syria of the local galaxy, because we're the point where these two forces are pressing up against each other. And at this point, what we need to be doing is create a movement so that, in the same way that we're teleported out of our issues, we literally have to evolve and teleport out of ourselves. That's the basic upshot of the whole thing. Because if you stick in the 3D, you're stuck.
Right. Well, if you go back, like I said, if you go back and watch the movie Tomorrowland, that's the whole message of that film. Is that, well, look at the reality we're creating for ourselves now. And it's like it's a disaster, and it's like it doesn't have to be this way. We can change our minds and change our future, change our world, and we have the power to do that. But we have to have develop the initiative to want to do that.
Well, I was saying to my friend today, the only reason that you can't do something is because you believe you can't do it. And the only reason you believe you can't do it is because you've been traumatized into not accepting your own judgment, your own discernment, your own sovereignty, and your own will. Our will gets broken every moment that a doctor says, oh, no, you can't take that. You can't. Every moment your mother says, you can't eat that. You can't. All of those you can't, they just build up to a shell that prevents us from being our true, magnificent, godlike selves. And we can manifest the Nazis out of here if we have the will to. And the Nazis rely on the fact that they are holding the cards of will. They've done all the willing. They've got all the will together. And so it really leaves very little for you to take up and say, well, what do I want? What's my part in this world? Oh, well, you're just here to, be crushed under the boot. No, actually, I'm going to grab that boot, turn it around, and flip you over.
Well, Sabrianzi always said the only thing limiting the progress of the Earth human is the Earth human himself. Well, so it's in our hands. It's like it's our responsibility to fix things here. And it's like they always made the point that don't wait for us to do it for you. It's like, this is your responsibility. This is something you have to do for yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So now we're going to take another part of the fractal, and talk to something. Well, maybe that you and I may not have directly experienced, but we understand the scenario is the battered wife syndrome, and the thing that they call Stockholm syndrome.
Yes.
Is that you can be beaten every day, and you still love the person who's beating you. And that's what that's one of the things that the ETs don't quite get.
Right.
And that is one of it's a bug in the human operating system.
Yes. Yes.
And it's a protective device because it allows us as children to survive with evil parents. But what it prevents us from doing is unlocking ourselves. And this is one of my missions, is to find out the key to unlocking the psychic lock that prevents us from taking our will back.
Right.
And I'm not talking about just willpower to diet, which is another illusion, by the way. But there's a freezing, a coagulation of our emotional systems that allows us, that prevents us from moving on quickly, and being able to experience a situation, and then go and wash the dishes, or most of us have to go, wow. Oh my God, I think I need to take a break. They can't move from one thing to another because of this emotional clagginess that we are surrounded by. And I believe that this is all part of the whole Truman Show Earth living. It's all caused by frequencies. It's all been, we're bombarded by frequencies that make us feel that. And we're also continually traumatized to reinforce that trauma. Right. So the upshot of that is that we are deliberately retarded, and we're kept in a kind of psychic zoo that we don't realize that we're just in a zoo that's in a park, in a field, in a country, on a planet. If you see, that we are. This is this tiny slit that we see through.
Well, I think that's part. If you look at technology and the mass media since World War II, one of the greatest weapons, one of the greatest wonder weapons from Germany in World War II was television, as a weapon of mass deception.
Absolutely.
And this is, television really, one of the first broadcasts was the 1936 Olympics in Berlin, whatever year that was. It was the year they had the Berlin Olympics, and that was when they first used television. The first television broadcast of any power was at the Berlin Olympics. And by the time we were kids, every living room in America and probably the UK also had a television set. And so our whole perception of reality, and this is what television was designed for, was to project a perception of reality into everybody's mind. And I grew up believing that everything that Walter Cronkite said in the evening news was absolute gospel truth. Nobody questioned it.
Absolutely.
So it's like, so ask yourself, well, if they'll believe that, what kind of shit can we tell them that they'll believe it all, right? So now it's like we've had how many generations, how many decades of this mind control, to where we're just zombies. We're just nobody thinks at all. No, when's the last time anybody had an original idea? We're all just you can take the mass population, don't teach them anything in school, and then let them sit in front of a TV or a computer screen all day, and it's like, what are they? They're zombies. So one of the in fact, there's a new study, there's a new psychological study out, which is called Ponerology. Have you ever heard of that? Ponerology?
No. Tell us more, Jim.
Well, it's like it's the inability of a mass population to recognize that their own leaders are psychopaths.
All right, yeah, I like that one. What's it called again?
Hello, I mean, this has become a psychological study all in itself. It's like This is a psychological aberration of contemporary culture, and it's not just the United States; it's everywhere. It's like the inability of the population itself to recognize that their own leaders are sociopaths. So what do? You said, well, here's one sociopath. Let's vote. You vote that one out. Let's vote another one in. And it's, you cannot tell the difference. You cannot recognize the depth of character that your own leaders have. It's
it hurts too much. It hurts far too much to do that.
Well,
so shy away from it and believe what they're told.
It hurts because it hurts to have to think.
Yeah.
But if this political campaign or that political campaign tells you that their candidate is the most asbestos for our country, and it's like, well, if you're predisposed to be a Republican or a Democrat, it's like you will just believe whatever the sales pitch is. And not, well, have you really studied this person's character? Have you really looked at their history? Have you really made an effort to see? It's like, do we really want this person in the White House? Do we really want this person in Congress? It's like, a lot of these people belong behind bars.
Yeah, absolutely.
They don't belong in positions of power. But when the general population can't even discern that, that's when you're in real trouble.
Well, then William Casey will have done his job. So,
absolutely.
And it is, we are in a place where it's just like, okay, so here's the thing, maybe all of us know somebody who has experienced this kind of battered wife thing, and the woman always goes back, or the husband, can be,
right.
Can be the other way around.
Right. So we have a whole population. We have a whole population, that's being used and abused, but we'll always go right back. We'll go right back, and we'll pick another one who will abuse us even more.
Exactly. Because one of the things about abuse, it turns out, is that it kind of seeks more.
Yes.
Because it's actually trying to seek to heal itself. So it's pulling you through the same feeling, hoping that one day you'll recognize what the feeling is, which is like, get the heck out of here. It's like, that's what the lesson is. There's a lesson in it. So
like I say, there's a psychological study of this on an individual level, but now there's a new psychological study of this on a group level.
Well, that's good. But as far as I can see, you just scale it up. Everything in nature is a fractal, and these concepts, the memes, just scale up to a different octave of understanding. Sure. A meta understanding of like collections of psychologists can suddenly come up with an idea. There. Oh yes, that's just the same as that. It's the same kind of pattern, and then they'll get it. Not many people do. Anyway. We're coming to the end of a couple of hours, and I think we've had a very fascinating and perhaps insightful. Give people some things to think about, because I don't want to debunk the idea that we're not alone, but I don't want people to be completely gullible into being fooled that ship that is landing on your doorstep, or that's landing in the field down the road from you, saying that they're first contact and would you like to come for a ride, little girl, is very likely to be something not as beneficial. So what I'd like to do is kind of educate people without just saying,
Well,
giving people what might be the case, just to think.
I look back at it in 1980. I was just naive enough that if Semyazi had landed in my backyard and said, "Would you like to go for a ride in my beam ship?" I probably would have jumped at the chance. But now I think, well, thanks for the offer, but I think I'll pass. I enjoy watching you fly around, but I don't know that I'm ready to go and just blindly take a ride on your spaceship just yet.
Or they would have to be giving me some serious passcodes.
Yeah,
it's like, all right,
right.
You can't pass me off as a naive farmer.
right.
You know, I've done my research. I know about you Nazis, and
Right,
yeah,
right.
you smell like a Nazi.
So how can how can you prove to me that you're really from the Pleiades?
That's right. That's right. And
even if you do come from the Pleiades, how do I know that you're not a Nazi that relocated there?
exactly.
That's
Exactly.
I mean, okay, Jay, that's where it is now. So, well,
Isn't it?
What's the real?
Exactly. So here's some concepts, right? Not all right. So we've had Iron Sky, Nazis on the moon. We've also had Nazis in the Hollow Earth. Let's have Nazis in subterranean underground bases under the Atlantic and beneath the Pacific. Let's talk about Nazis colonizing Aldebran. Let's talk about Nazis stealing people to work as slaves to populate the Aldebranian society. How about Nazis in the Pleiades? How about Nazis on Ursa Major? Go ahead. Sorry.
How about the Nazis that took over the CIA and NSA or NASA since World War II? How about the ones in our own backyard?
How about the Nazis that killed JFK? How about the Nazis that run the Fed? How about the Fed fed the Nazis? How about it's good, isn't it? It's like
it is if Jay, if you look at geopolitics today, this is what's really scary. The rest of the world regards the United States as the way we used to regard Germany in World War II.
Yep, absolutely.
We are the very scary power mad empire that's out of control now.
Yeah,
and that's tragic.
So, since I'm in Scotland and you're in America, I'm beaming telepathically through you this potential truth, Jim, that it may have all been a really, really sinister, really, really cynical, really, really high tech, really, really very high science fakery on the entire world. The Nazi International is already here. The New World Order is already here. Now we need to work on it, and we need to work on it basically we need to evolve out of it. We can't use 3D thinking. We can't fight them using fighting technologies because they've cornered the market. There are better ways. There are much better ways, and those are the things that we've been told that we can't do. Thoughts?
Well, I think I have another blog here. I can pull it up. Secret societies. If you go to my website, Secret Societies and Flying Saucers, or let's see, there's another one. I did one. I don't see it here. If you look at history since World War I and the explosion of technology since World War I and especially in World War II, it's almost as if here it is. It's Atlantis Rising. This is the one you need to read. Read Atlantis Rising. It's my blog, Atlantis Rising. And it's almost if you look at the whole history of humanity, going back to Babylon, and bring it all the way up to today, and it's like this obsession with power and technology and control and so forth. It's almost like somewhere along the line they have been preparing themselves for an extraterrestrial, an off-planet conflict more than the technology of controlling this planet. It's almost like there's somebody who's trying to get back in the game here. Somebody got knocked out of the game, back before recorded history. An extraterrestrial group that maybe came to this planet and has been slowly rebuilding its power base and its technology so it can go back out into space and get back into the fray, as it were. And and to be contenders in a much larger game, a much larger contest that's going on out in space. Is, you know, when we were kids, you know, I grew up. World War II was the war to end all wars, and it's like, well, why didn't at that point when we defeated Japan and Germany, why didn't we just, you know, pack in our weapons and just decide to be happy and live together in peace from then on? So didn't we learn anything from World War II? Well, no. It's like, and if you look at the obsession with technology, with the obsession with space, and super dimensional space travel, it's like this has been the obsession since World War II. I said, well, what do you people that run this planet, what do you know that we don't know? What are you preparing for? It's like there's, at the end of World War II, it wasn't enough to have atomic bombs. Now we have to have, you know, a space fleet. Now we have to, are we going to launch some kind of a colonization, a ruthless colonization, like when the Spanish launched the Armada against Britain? Or are we planning some kind of a comparable thing with a great space fleet? What is this all headed for? The obsession with technology and space, and like I said, it seems to be pushing an agenda that we can't perceive here in day-to-day reality. But somebody somewhere is pushing this agenda right to the hilt.
Absolutely, Jim. And I think we need to continue this conversation. I think it's a very interesting and rich line of investigation, because we can dig up a lot of things that people don't know, that have been kept secret, that are now not so secret because, you know,
Right.
time has passed, you know, people have spoken.
Right.
And we can start to put the dots together, bring the dots together before it's too late. I mean, perhaps they're relying on the fact that it's so complex that nobody would get it until it's too late. But
No, it is complex. It's complex, and it transcends individual lifetimes. To say, if this is an agenda that seems to be run by somebody who lives outside of time and space,
yes,
and that each individual in the brief time of a human lifetime wouldn't understand it, wouldn't perceive it, because we don't live, because our lives are so short and so insignificant in this big game, that we're not aware of it. But if you go back and look at the whole history, and I have to say that Joseph P. Farrell and Michael Tessarian have done extraordinary research in this particular area, looking at the entire history of the human race and ask yourself, well, where did we come from and where in the hell are we going? And wherever it seems to be that we're headed, it doesn't feel good.
yes.
And so if this is true,
yeah,
how do extraterrestrials perceive us? Are we becoming a threat to the entire galaxy?
yes,
because of the technologies that we're developing.
Exactly. And this is why we need to learn about it, and why we have to stop it in whatever way each of us individually can, and each of us individually can stop it.
Right.
If we were able to be self-realized, and I think we got to finish the conversation now, and we can reconvene and bring more people in. I'd like to bring Alex Collier in. I'd like to bring Simon Parks. You'd like Simon Parks. Let's continue.
For sure.
Let's continue this conversation and see where it takes us. We've got a few amazing minds now who are up to speed on this stuff. You know, male, 54, seeks female, must be aware of the Nazi agenda. Must have good sense of humor. Okay. Sorry, no, I do have a girlfriend, and she would kill me if I said that. Anyway,
must have her own beam ship.
Must have her own beam ship. All right, thank you so much, Jim Nichols. It's been a real buzz.
You bet. Thank you. Thanks, Jay. Have a good one.
And it's Jim Nichols UFO Art? No,
Jim Nichols UFO.net.
Jim
all one word.
.net. Thank you very much. Good night, everybody. This has been Ever Beyond TV, taking you ever beyond.